Hello, I am John Najarian, and RebelCon 2022 is almost here. We do have a virtual pass. The virtual pass gives you full access to everything, all the streams, the live trading sessions, all of our fabulous keynote speakers. So to learn more about what's going on at RebelCon 2022, whether you're in person or virtual, check out marketrebellion.com/Dallas.
Bang. I did order one of those clappers, Pete. I really did. But right now, because I'm remote here on the New York floor, I have to hold up my my mic right here because I don't have the usual boom. I guess I could travel with that too. Jackie over here would probably let me do that if I didn't ruin her desk by attaching it, Pete.
I like Jackie.
Folks, welcome to the Rebel Edge. I'm John Najarian. He's Pete Najarian.
Yeah.
Jared is responsible for any of the bad stuff that happens during the show because he's the producer. So if it doesn't come across well, it's Jared's fault.
Yep. We're passing a buck. Hey, he just passed us something that wasn't a buck.
He might have been telling us we're still number one, Pete.
Yeah, we're number one. We're number one on cable. There's no doubt.
Folks, Macro Minute, because that's all it's worth. Again, you want to tune into some other channel and get all the news about stuff that has already happened and or doesn't matter. Feel free. Pete, as far as Macro Minute today, are you still thinking it's all about interest rates, or are you thinking that maybe the markets are optimistic over what's going on in Ukraine?
I think that's a combination of that, John, and we're also looking at CPI. I think people are also looking at the idea that maybe we've continued a little bit of a downward path maybe on the inflation topic. So I think that combination certainly at least something to do with why we were up 300 plus points, because there wasn't anything absolutely direct other than that. So that's the Micro Minute. The hell with it. Let's go on.
Yeah, let's jump into the real news of the day. Yeah. This one is something that may play out over time. Yeah. And it's right up Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk's alley, because this is as high tech as it gets. Apparently, Google has some engineers that have been working on a high-speed telecom project that has a secret name, Pete. Anytime you have a secret name for a project,
there's a secret.
That's a good thing. Hyperfast ultrasonic network that spans land, sea, air, and space, as well as deep space. They're going to have to define that for me, Pete. But basically, laser communication technology that will be at a greater scale and speed than ever seen before. That's what Google is rolling out, Pete. Not for public use yet, but that's what they finally told us they've been working on.
Well, it's laser communication technology, John. You know what that means? If Dr. Evil was here, he'd say, hey, look, I want sharks with lasers. This is Google. This is who Google is, right? I mean, they're always working on something very cutting edge, something really cool. But it's always in a bit of a dangerous way because we don't know what that means for us and our own personal information and everything that I think Google takes from us on a daily basis. They wash it out, they figure it out, and then they flush it back out and give it back to us. But they've already spied on us enough. And I think this is just another great example of that. Great company, though, but they need to give more money back to Stanford for those guys so they don't have to cut programs anymore on the sports side.
Well, Pete, what about this Bristol-Myers move? Because Bristol-Myers is one of those companies that you and I have both jumped in from time to time. You might still be in it.
Nope.
Pete. Yeah. I am not in it either, but it's making a nice upside move today, folks, because of a combination of this psoriasis drug that they've been working on. It finally got a thumbs up, an FDA approval. And also, it's that's thunder going by right there, Pete. And they've also got some good news about how they're progressing with treatment of tumors and things like that. Both of them providing a pretty nice lift to BMY today.
Yeah, Bristol-Myers is doing really well. Obviously, it's up 5.5% or something like that, John. I think it hit almost $76, and it's had a nice little path. Actually, healthcare itself has had a pretty decent path in the overall scheme of things. Merck, Pfizer, those are the names that I continue to hold on to. I've held on to those for a really long time for different reasons as well, John. But yeah, this psoriasis drug, we're talking about something that's really impacting Amgen right now. That's down 4%, John. They kind of owned the space for a while. Bristol's jumping in there. Bristol's flying to the upside. You've got Amgen pulling back fairly significantly. And we're talking about a $2.3 billion market. So nothing to sneeze at. You're always looking for those billion-dollar type drugs out there. This is one of them. And I think that's why we're seeing, and it's probably why, John, we had some of the positive outlook in terms of what they were looking at in the future when they were looking at their full year forecast. I think they had a pretty good inclination that this was going to be a drug that was going to get passed, and certainly it has. And now it looks like it's going to be nothing but green lights in terms of this going forward for Bristol. That's a great thing.
Yeah, I agree, Pete. It's good news for anybody that suffers from psoriasis, and I do mean suffers because you know that can be a very painful malady that folks have. Pete, what about this one though? NIO. Some analyst today basically makes it his number one pick in the Chinese EV space.
Yeah.
And, you know, you and I have both talked about when Warren Buffett was lightening up on Boyd or BYD, and a number of Chinese EV companies. There are literally dozens of them. The biggest among them really is NIO. And he says this one is poised to double in the next 12 months. What do you think?
It's a big call. You know, NIO's, it's down on the lower end, John. So I don't think that's a huge stretch to say that, especially because of the concentration and people going after more and more the green energy and going towards some of the EV space as part of that. But so that makes sense. And actually last quarter, John, their deliveries were up. They were very strong year over year. You look at some of the forecasts they put out there, that was pretty strong. They want to compete more with Tesla in terms of going directly at them with the higher end cars as well, John, with the sedans. So I think they really are moving a lot in the right directions. This is a stock, by the way, it was usually, or back, you know, not too terribly long ago, a year ago, multi-billion-dollar market cap that has shrunk down significantly because of the fact that it's been sold off to this point. So seeing some upside and today being up 10, 11%, pretty strong. That's a big move to double, but I can see how they have that vision going forward, John. So I think it makes a lot of sense, actually, that this is a stock that really could perform really well over the next year or so.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, folks, you've got Lee, which is symbol LI.
Yeah.
You've got that fact that, as Pete said, this one was $45 a year ago, is now $21.
Mm-hmm.
Getting back to 45 means, Pete, this thing would be up around 80 billion in market cap. So worth watching. And then keep an eye also on that XPEV.
Mm-hmm.
I like that one as well. It's not necessarily the cars as much as everything else EV in China. All right, Pete. Lastly, this Sigma Lithium plays right into what we're talking about, because nobody making EVs right now can do it without lithium.
Right.
And these guys have the biggest mine and development in Brazil. And it's one of the places where, you know, some people might say Brazil's dangerous from time to time, but it's not Afghanistan. And if you're going after lithium, there's a few places you can get it other than the ocean and seawater. And Brazil is one of the big places that people are mining it right now.
Yeah, major player, John. It's really interesting. These guys doing an unbelievable job. We just got done talking about NIO and obviously Tesla and all the names that you brought up, so many in China, but also in the United States. We just keep getting bigger and bigger. Even the big boys, obviously, GM and Ford and everybody. Also the Germans with you know, Porsche, and you look over at something like a Mercedes-Benz, all of them moving into the EV space in a big way. Well, what do they need? They need copper, they need lithium, they need a lot of things. And so you can understand why this is an absolutely monster market. I think on the pullbacks, it's why I always kind of cast a view over to it when I see any of those types of, in that category, those names, those miners. I take a quick look and decide whether or not it's the right day or not to do it. But this is certainly a monster and up about 12% today. all for the right reasons. John, we got unusual options coming at us now, huh?
Yep. And, we'll play with that theme, Pete. You and I have talked for the last two stocks about Chinese and that EV recommendation that was made and how it's lifting those stocks. Well, JD is seeing some pretty good cash flow today. 7,200 of these Nov 6750 calls. So 7,200, since every option is for 100 shares, means that's 720,000 share equivalent. Anytime somebody's putting down basically 750,000 shares, Pete, for a $61 stock, that's a big trade. We're talking about $57 million potential control of that one trade alone. And it's all the way out to November, Pete. So I like this one. I bought at the monies, though, because just like you, I don't like buying way out of the money calls. They're buying the 6750s with the stock at 61. Not for me. So instead, I'm buying 1-to-1. I'll buy those, and then I'll start selling upside calls against it as it rallies.
Which is a great strategy. Is something we talk about all the time, John. If the values are there, it's okay to just own just the call. But if it costs a little bit more, there's a little bit more time attached to it, all those factors, it's smart to spread those off just a little bit. So I think that's a great way to approach it. So for me, John, I'm looking at Starbucks. And what's really interesting is this is a name that we do see some activity in here fairly regularly, but today we had a buyer of 14,000 of the October 92.5 calls. They're paying $2.35. This is a high dollar trade as well, just like you were just discussing. And it's a roll of something that was right, and they want to take that off, but they still want to be in the trade. They being whoever this buyer was, over 12,000 of the September 87.5 calls. They did that way back on January 29th. So they're making money off of that trade, and they're rolling up. And that's always something we like to see. When we've got somebody who's made money on a trade, now they want to stay in the trade, but they're taking some off the table. A, that tells us they're disciplined, they're smart, and B, they were right. I'd like to be right with them, so I'm going to ride this thing as well. So a nice trade, and I'm looking forward to Starbucks going a little bit higher. A lot of pressure on this name, obviously, and they've got a new CEO that they finally determined who is going to be. They keep bringing back the old man, John. He comes back in, he hangs around for a while. He offends a few people, and then he leaves, and he goes back. So that's all part of the whole thing that he does. But Starbucks, we know what a cool company they really are and what they offer for their employees. So it really is. It's something that I think that they probably are in for a pretty decent quarter coming up. And I think that's what people are playing off of right now.
And Pete, I'm always a fan of any of these companies that can sell a substance that's addictive, like caffeine.
It's always a good thing.
Keeps you coming back, doesn't it? All right. Well, Pete was talking about a lot of sports last week, folks. And a lot of those games ended up being hugely interesting, especially, Pete, in college football, because you had Bama going into Texas, and we both thought that could be a pretty tight game. And, Saban came this close to losing that one, Pete.
If it wasn't for his Heisman Trophy quarterback, they would have lost it, John. He was unbelievable in the final, few seconds of the game, directing the team downfield. Texas had kicked the field goal to go ahead. Unbelievable game, but there were so many others, John. How about Georgia Southern going up to Lincoln, Nebraska, and taking them down? And not only did he take them down, they've played so badly, they got rid of and they took down Scott Frost, who I like. I think he's a great guy. Had a great career at Oregon as a coach, also at Central Florida, undefeated, by the way, in 2017. The guy did a magnificent job, but then he goes back to Nebraska, his alma mater. He won a national title there. The guy was just, everybody loved him. And I loved him. I got to know him pretty well, but I'll tell you what, he just could not execute, John. They could not recruit. They can. I still think they can recruit to Lincoln, but he wasn't the right guy. I don't know why that is, but he wasn't. How about Appalachian State taking down Texas A&M? I mean, it's game after game after game. Oh, Notre Dame, by the way. Oh, yeah, they had a pretty good game, an easy one against Marshall, going to come back. They got beat. I mean, it just shows you that as much as, you've got the haves and the have-nots in college football and the NIL money and all this other stuff, there's still enough players out there where those Daniels can take them down. And that's exactly what we were seeing. Unbelievable weekend.
I loved this one clip that Barstool's running of Ed Orgeron
Yeah.
the former LSU coach, where he says, because he always talked like this, "Go Tigers," and that's always what he finished all of his press conferences with, "Go Tigers."
Yeah.
Well, they were asking him, "So how was it when they let you go, coach?" And he said, "Well, they said, well, Ed, you got 17.1 million. We're going to pay you that, but we're going to get rid of you." And he said, "What door do you want me to leave out of, and how fast?"
I'll tell you
that's
what.
I'd say too, Pete.
Oh, yeah.
17 mil, really? Okay, bye. And
Yeah.
do you need me to shine any shoes on my way out?
Well, John, let's jump to the NFL now. The NFL was just as interesting and just as many shockers out there. I mean, there are so many. First of all, start off with the Steelers in Cincinnati. Cincinnati looked like they were going to walk away with it. They got into overtime. They scored they went back and forth in this game. Pittsburgh wins the game, which I think shocked a lot of people. How about the Giants and the Titans? Another one where, well, the Titans are obviously going to beat the Giants. I mean, the Giants are starting all over. They got a new coach, and didn't happen. Then the Bears. Now, that's the one I wanted to stop on for you. How about your Bears with the Niners? Now, they didn't outplay them necessarily in terms of yards and all the rest of it between the 20s, but what matters is between the 20 and the goal line. And that's where you guys came out on top. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and Pete, all you have to do is watch 2 plays, and it's why Fields is, just a great quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
He scrambled and made those plays that he hit the guys for touchdowns on both plays.
Mm-hmm.
Had he not scrambled, had he got, if he was, some slow dude back there that couldn't escape and get out of the pocket to make those completions, the Bears lose probably to some, despite a fantastic defensive effort. But, let's face facts. He did. Scrambled, got out of the pocket, found the open receiver, hit him 2 times for big sixes, and that's what put him away really in the final minutes.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, we talked about that Bills game on Thursday night. We were given a little bit of a prelude. Boy, it was the Bills game. It wasn't the Bills versus the Rams. It was the Bills. The Bills absolutely destroyed them. They had 7 sacks against Stafford. The champs got these beautiful rings. Well, they didn't really need the rings. They needed something a lot more than that, John, because they needed Von Miller back on their side of the ball instead of back there with the Buffalo Bills. All he did was destroy the entire offensive line. The game of the weekend for me, though, was Philadelphia, because I like that team a lot. I like Jalen Hurts. I like what he brings to the table. Big D lineman, a great offensive line, great receivers. A.J. Brown is absolutely unbelievable. But I'll tell you, John, the Kitty Cats were not the Kitty Cats. They were the Tiger Cats.
No, they were the Lions. Over at all.
And they gave them a game like nobody would have been expecting. So I will say this. Based on that little just litmus test that we got, I don't know that the Bears, the Vikings, and Green Bay are just going to walk over Detroit this year. I think Detroit looked pretty daggone good. And as good as my Vikings looked, let's be honest, Green Bay didn't have either offensive tackle, right or left. They didn't have the old receiver Adams. They didn't even have this year's receiver Lazard. So we played against a Green Bay team that basically had Aaron Rodgers, who can't throw to himself. He had nobody else to throw to. So I think that's
how many of those balls bounced off these guys' hands, Pete?
And he's so frustrated, John. They're
terrible.
Their kid who's almost a first-round pick, he's right out of the first round. They threw him the ball, great athlete, great everything, but he better start catching the ball or Aaron Rodgers is going to be pretty ticked off with that kid.
Aaron might put his foot where the sun doesn't shine if that kid drops another one of those, Pete.
Yeah, that was not great for them, but the Vikings did what they were supposed to do. They did the right thing. They took care of business, and the Vikings looked really, really good. And I'll tell you what, Kirk Cousins, for all those haters, there's one of them over at CNBC. He's been wrong, he is wrong, and he'll continue to be wrong in the future.
Folks, thank you for joining us for the Rebels Edge today. We'll be back tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. He's Pete Najarian. I'm John Najarian. We'll see you tomorrow, folks.